So with everyone kind of just freaking out about Byleth being in Smash, I sort of wanted to talk about how Fire Emblem, in theory, should be represented in Smash. Now let me preface that by saying that I love Fire Emblem. I've played a ton of their games. I'm not going to say all of them, but I've played pretty much all the games that have characters representing Fire Emblem in Smash. I've also played many others that, don't have any kind of representation, which probably is for the best considering we have, what, like 8 now, considering Byleth. And it seems like many people feel like Fire Emblem should be represented in a very different way than how they're currently represented, considering that people feel like they've been represented a little too much. Now, the idea behind this video essentially is just multiple different ways of how Fire Emblem could be represented to essentially make certain people happy. Now, am I saying these are the things that I want? Not necessarily, but I will go into what I personally think is the best case scenario, or maybe what I personally would want. But like I said, this is just to play, I guess, a little bit of devil's advocate to see what are ways that maybe people would be more open to Fire Emblem representation in Smash. First things first, I feel that the biggest reason why a lot of people have this sort of negativity to Fire Emblem being in Smash is because of two main reasons. One that I keep seeing mentioned quite often is essentially the idea that Fire Emblem isn't as popular as certain other franchises and yet gets so much more representation. They would like to see the representation at least cut back in some capacity, considering that franchises like The Legend of Zelda, which is so much more popular than Fire Emblem, just does not have as much representation as Fire Emblem, especially when you consider about half of its representation is the same character in the sense of Link. There's definitely an argument to be had, especially when you consider that Fire Emblem has 8 representatives now. You can kind of see the argument taking form. So, there's that as well. The second major reason I keep seeing of the criticism of Fire Emblem representation is basically that when you consider Marth, Roy, Lucina, and Chrom, you basically have 4 characters that play the same, or at least very similarly. On a competitive standpoint, if you at least understand how these characters work, you can acknowledge that Roy, at least, does not really play the same as Marth. I mean, you can see that there's a lot of moves that are similar, but because of, certain moves being different and certain setups just being completely different than what Marth says, it's just not exactly the same. But I can see why some people would feel that it is, very, very similar. And when you have essentially 2 Echo Fighters belonging to the same franchise and 4 characters just playing very similarly, you can kind of understand why some people are getting tired of more representation of the same series. I mean, in theory, if, Sakurai wanted to, rep certain franchises that just don't have a lot of reps, he could easily just make a clone or an echo of the only character they may or may not have, or maybe just one of the few characters they do have. So that way they can get more representation. So when you see a franchise that has, already a ton of representation and then suddenly get 2 Echo Fighters related to them, you can kind of see how certain people do not like that. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking if we essentially remove the... And I'm not saying for Ultimate specifically, because Smash Ultimate's big, selling point is that everyone's here. I do feel that certain characters would not be here if it didn't have that tagline. If Smash was not, trying to specifically bring back every single character. If this was a regular Smash game that did not attempt that, I don't think you'd see all 8 of these Fire Emblem characters. But let's, go off of a hypothetical and say, what if the next Smash game is around the corner, right? And these 8 Fire Emblem characters, they need to do some cuts, right? Let's just go with that. If that was the case, which characters in Fire Emblem does it make sense to cut in order to essentially lower the representation and still make people happy? Because obviously, despite the fact that there's so many of these characters and, it's kind of hated for a reason like the ones I've mentioned, there's still gonna be people who play these characters. So what's the best way of going about it? I feel like a very simplistic answer to that would just be to cut the echoes, right? Because if you keep the totally 100% unique characters in the game, right, that they have no similarities whatsoever, you would basically just have Marth, Robin, Byleth, Corrin, and Ike. That would essentially cut them down to about 5 characters, which would, at least how I personally feel, I think that's fair, because to me, the thing that would be very bad, I guess, or very negative to the Smash Brothers roster is to cut unique fighters, right? Back then, I wasn't too big on cutting Mewtwo when it went from Melee to Brawl, just off the principle that Mewtwo was a totally unique character. So it, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And seeing Roy get cut in favor of Ike made me happy, because at the time, Roy was essentially just Fire Marth, and Ike was actually totally unique. So, for that reason, I totally was open to it. The difference being is that if I was speaking for myself purely, and I said, okay, they're going to cut characters, which ones would I want to come back? Essentially, all the unique ones would come back, and even if this is a little bit controversial or not, I actually would want Roy to come back, considering that, back during Melee, you can make the argument that Roy was essentially just Fire Marth. However, when he came back as DLC for Smash 4, they kind of like really reworked him or retweaked him, and he just doesn't play the same way anymore. Like, he's definitely not Fire Marth. He just has different setups. To me personally, Roy to Marth feels kind of like what Luigi is to Mario, where they fight very similar, but they just don't play anywhere near the same because of a few different moves and just the way setups work. So that's just how I look at it. So me, on my own personal bias, I would have the 5 unique characters plus Roy, which I understand is still 6 characters, and that is probably a lot for some people. But again, if you want just the totally unique characters, 5 I feel makes the most sense. But I'm sure people would argue, like, is that how Fire Emblem should be represented? Because I know personal friends of mine and a few people on the internet would also not want Corrin to be in the game, primarily because Corrin was essentially an advertisement. And if we go by that logic, that characters that are essentially an advertisement should, not be in the game or just go away, essentially. That basically just means that you would also be getting rid of Roy. But I don't really know if people don't want to see those characters at all, or they want to see the echoes go away as well, or both, or whatever the case may be. If it's a situation where people prefer to not have them and it just speaking purely on them, like if you're one of the people who don't mind the Fire Emblem characters, you just don't like the advertisement way of they've been treating them, then essentially you'd be cutting Roy and Corrin, and then I guess depending on how you look at things, Byleth, because I know some people feel like because of the timing on when Byleth was essentially being worked on, Three Houses wasn't out yet, but now that Byleth is getting added at this current time, and Three Houses has been out for quite some time and people really like it, I feel like, to me, it's not really the same as Corrin, not in the sense of it being an advertisement, because it definitely is, especially when it coincides with the DLC coming out. I just feel like this is a much better example of the advertisement strategy, considering that we've already at least gotten to know Byleth and, Three Houses as a game before they, basically added him to the game, right? Roy and Corrin, to my knowledge, were both situations where we didn't know the game at all, and they were just essentially advertising it to us. So if you go by the that, I guess, idea, personally, I like Byleth. I'm not hyped to play Byleth. That's the difference. I'm not really hyped to play him. I just think it's cool that he's unique, and I feel like because he's unique, it's cool by me, right? But you guys let me know how you personally feel about, Byleth being in Smash, or how Fire Emblem should be represented in Smash. Personally, I feel like I can live with the echoes being gone. for in the future Smash games. I feel like Fire Emblem should be represented in a way that has multiple characters, sure, because Fire Emblem just has a ton of them, and also make sure they're all totally unique. That's my biggest thing. Like, I don't really care too much about the character itself as long as they're unique and different. But I can understand why they're still there, because everyone is here is essentially the selling point, or was the selling point, of Smash Ultimate. But yeah, let me know how you guys feel in the comments. I would like to hear your thoughts. I've heard a lot of it through Twitter, and I just feel like, you know, people are mad for a bunch of different reasons. And if you're someone who doesn't want to see more Fire Emblem and I didn't address your particular criticisms, you know, please let me know what those criticisms are in the comments. I would love to have a much better understanding over how people feel about the Fire Emblem characters in Smash. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.